So we're heading into LCQ and set champ season. So let's go for my top 8 list from the 8-case 93 player tournament that happened this weekend in SoCal. So some of the keynotes here is that I cut the Flynn and the Sisu, and instead I am running a Castle, Cusco's, Crabs, and Finders Keepers. These are all cards that a lot of people have ended up cutting, but I still believe that they're really important pieces of the deck. So probably the biggest decision that most people will see is cutting Flynn Sisu. I don't believe that they are the strongest win condition with the deck at the current moment, but instead their job is to create non-games against decks like Red-Blue, where you're able to go ahead and get 3 to 6 lore off of a Flynn and just win because of that advantage, right? But you're turning those games from already winning or winnable games to guaranteed wins, whereas comparably, we could be shoring up weaknesses with other matchups in order to go ahead and using those slots of cards, right? So oftentimes Ruby Sapphire, their only ways to answer it are to Brawl or Tala, but if they don't have those answers or you're on the play, a lot of times they'll just kind of end up winning because of the Flynn Sisu. But that doesn't even happen every game. So why are we running cards that can't guarantee a win if their only job is to guarantee the win, right? And outside of playing them on exactly 2 and 3, Flynn Sisu tend to just be ink anyways, and, well, having an easy ink decision is nice. Being able to go ahead and decide what cards are good and bad in certain scenarios is a really big part of this game, and making hard ink decisions should be something important within a deck. So, one really big example of this that I'll go ahead and show right here is if I go ahead and have the Flynn Rider, right, instead of the Queen's Castle here, say I'm on 6 ink, on 5 ink, I can go ahead and ink the Flynn and immediately just Rabbit Bounce, right? It's a very simple line, and if you have the Flynn, it's basically the only line that I could see any player making here, right? Versus alternatively, if we have the Castle, there might be an argument or a spot at which it is correct to go ahead and ink a Snake so that we can go ahead and play Castle Turnabogs, right? Maybe there are more cards in hand, maybe we have draw, right? I'm just showing 4 cards out of this hand to show this example. It's not a great example, but this is kind of the concept that we're looking at here of Flynn Rider being a dead card means that we have less choices and decisions that we're allowed to make. So, one of the other big choices that I made with this deck is that we're replacing those 2 and 3 drop slots with Cusco's and Crabs. Cusco's are able to go ahead and fight for board control, and because players associate Cusco with Crab naturally, they'll see him as a 4-2 who can challenge into their Daisies or into their Lawrences, right? The card isn't individually incredibly powerful, but playing Crabs with it makes it super strong and threatening, and it can just be a good bounce target for Foxes, right? So, because Cusco can go ahead and also draw me back the card, it means that it's oftentimes a 1 for 0 if we're going ahead and trading it in, right? Where it's killing something and I'm going ahead and getting a card back. So, Crabs also just get to be a good body that can sing friends on the other side, can contest the board into a lot of these aggressive decks that we've been seeing, right? But because we are removing the Flynn and Sisu here, we do need to find a way to gain lore back, which is why we added the castles back in. Right? Sisu is one of the big 2 questers in the deck, and without it, we kind of need a way to shore up that weakness. Genie in and of itself is, like, kind of not great, purely due to the fact that it's uninkable, and it feels really clunky a lot of times. The card is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times where you'll end up being, oh, I have a bunch of uninkables in hand, Genie's not the card that you want to see there, and if you play it a lot of times, there's something better that you can do, and you can't play 2 of them early on inks 5 through 7, right? So instead, we can play castles. They're inkable. A lot of people have been cutting Mauis, so it's like a pretty good choice within the meta. That being said, I am probably dropping some LCQ EV, because now you're going to try and add more Mauis back into your decks. So please subscribe so it doesn't all go to waste. I think probably the biggest question that people are going to be asking about this deck, though, is why the Finders Keepers? And the main reason for that is I am very aggressive with how I trade my 1-drops, which normally are meant to cantrip, right? Most of the time you want your Chernobog's followers to go ahead and quest once or twice and then kill itself and you go ahead and get your draw, right? But alternatively, I'm very willing to keep my Chernobogs on board, force my opponent to make a trade so that I can get a good value trade off of it. But I lose a draw because of that, right? And Finders Keepers allows me to shore up that weakness and have even more draw in the deck to go ahead and snowball me into my rabbits, snowball me into genies, and get myself into a position where I have more answers than they have questions, right? One of the other big things about the castle is that it just forces your opponent to play very different, right? They're forced to hold Mauis, which otherwise could be considered an ink choice in newer versions of the deck, because it can't hit genies, right? It forces your opponent to save their crabs and save their foxes that otherwise could be used to bounce rabbits, right? Or could be used to bounce goats. Instead, they're forced to save those for the castle, and it puts just a lot of pressure on your opponent, knowing that you can drop a double castle on them. And oftentimes, decks still can't deal with that anyways. Sorry, I'm reading my notes, but it's a lot. One of the other big things about Finders Keepers is that it goes ahead and lets me stop being stupid if I make a mistake and let one of my rabbits die, right? It can get me back into a game from a really bad state if I make a mistake like that, which when you're playing something like Last Chance and you don't get a second chance at your games, having a second draw 3 can just be really powerful. But it's also a very skill testing card of knowing when you're allowed to go ahead and trade lore for drawing 3, right? Because when you're going ahead and taking a turn off in order to draw 3 cards, a lot of times it means that your opponent will have 1, 2, or 3 things that they're probably questing with, and knowing how much lore you're allowed to give them for free because you just did nothing for a turn is really massive, right? It's kind of the same concept of castle. You want to drop a castle on an empty board so that you know how much pressure they have and can go ahead and trade out, right? Some of the other small things about this deck is do not run the Bell. I only put the Bell in there because I did not own a third Elsa. Bell is really bad because we don't have things that are very tanky. I'm down on Elsa's, which is one of the big traders, Maui, which is another one of the big traders, right? So we really dislike Bell in this deck specifically, because we can't have Sisus to bump, things like that. And then you should be definitely playing more than one Tremaine here. The way that you beat Red-Blue typically is they'll put down a question, like Tamatoa, for example, right? And maybe they'll put down a Tipo, and you just Tremaine, shift Tremaine, bounce, and then keep doing it every single time that they want to play their things, right? It means that they have to play and commit 3 things in order to have 1 stick. And then if they do that, then you just be prepared, right? It puts your opponent into like this checkmate scenario where you're getting an extra mem every single turn and they're dying. They can't represent anything. But let's go ahead and talk about my matchup spread from the day and how I did. So some of the matchups here are, I started off the day up against a weird Mulan version of Red-Blue. I was on the draw, but I went 2-0. It's a really good matchup if I have my Tremaines, and I had my Tremaines. And I just get to brawl the Flavershims, and I kind of went out. Blurpool was actually really close. They went to 19 lore both games, but once I got ahead on board, I was able to win out since they don't have a way to get back from that. I faced Mines, Amber Steel, round 3. I was on the play. It was an aggro deck. You kind of know how that goes. Game 4, I lost to Christian Palayo. I don't know if I pronounced his last name right. I apologize if I did, but he's an incredibly skilled player, and I was really happy to lose there. Because if I'm going to lose to anyone, I can tell how skillful he was in that matchup. And, yeah. The 5th game, I was up against a very typical Flynn Sisu mirror matchup. I want to say on the draw, but yeah. So I was able to go ahead and win out the first game. I think they made some sort of mistake, and then the next couple games kind of went as you'd expect. And then the last game was a team kill. Well, I was on the play against a mirror match, but I was able to brawl the Flynn, and then just was able to snowball from there, because I have Finder's Keepers, which is a very powerful card in the mirror. The next round, it was really sad. So I hit my friend, and we wanted to just try and draw out so we could both make it, but we did the math wrong, and we didn't realize that a 4-1-1 player could win and make it. We ended up thinking that it was only the player who was 5-1 that was able to make it, but they ended up losing, and the other player ended up winning and knocked him out. So that was a really sad thing. I felt really bad about that, but we both looked at the math. He wanted to go ahead and draw, so it happens. I gave him the choice. And for the top 8 match, I played against a red-blue player on a shark build, and they played incredibly well. I bricked really hard throughout those games, and I was really tired, but they played phenomenally. I never got to go ahead and get back into the game. Anytime that I did get to have a chance at trying to draw a couple cards, I was just denied and punished incredibly well. I could never get ahead with the Cuscos because they just got Sisu'd. It was just painful all around. I'm hoping to make a updated Ruby M guide soon. I know there are a ton of resources out there already, but this is more of a deck tech rather than teaching you how to play Ruby M. And this is for a lot of the people who should already know the deck from the 20 lore Discord. And I'm just kind of leaking my really weird list out there. But yeah, I apologize that this was really messy. I had recorded a video before this, but the audio had looped like twice, so I was echoing throughout it, and I couldn't post it. It would have just sounded really bad. But this time, I feel like what I said was a lot less informative and worse. So, sorry about that. Maybe if you guys really want the echo version, I can send it, but God, it's awful. But feel free to ask whatever questions you have, either on Discord or through the comment sections. Continentals is going to be crazy. Last Chance Qualifiers is going to be a gamble of whether I make it regardless. So, like, I'm okay leaking the list because really the odds of someone who sees this and then hitting me are so low. It's like, okay. Anyways, goodbye. I hope you enjoyed the list.